Hello, horror fans. It's me, Cass, and
Kylee.
today we have on a very special guest. He has been on before. He came on previously to talk about the first installment of In Search of Darkness, the first set of the '90s collection. But we have David Weiner back on. How are you doing?
I'm great. I'm great. Happy to be with you guys today. Thanks for having me back.
Yes.
Yes, we're super excited. As we had stated before, when you come on last time, the '90s is one of my favorite eras of horror, and it also might just be because I was born in the '90s, and so I remember like a lot of significance, obviously, but that also I feel like is a great period of time where horror was kind of changing and fluxing. So I'm super excited to talk about the specifics. So, as of before, this certain set that we're going to talk about is 1995 to 99, and which was some very spectacular years. So we are definitely going to get into it and talk about it. But before we do that, we are going to go ahead and cue our intro, which we already told David that it has some '90s references in there. But we are going to go ahead and get the music started. So let's do this.
Welcome to the Horrorcraft Podcast.
All right.
Very nice. Very.
Thank you. Thank you. We love our intro. So yeah, we are super
I
excited.
have to already interrupt, and I'm forgetting the title, but the last one you have, that's like one of the first visual effects ever on camera. Not the first, but it's an early film where the transformation takes place,
Yep.
and they, playing with the not the lens, but the see, I'm already on Sunday mode. Anyway, it was really cool.
I know what you.
Yeah, there's a certain name for the way that they did it,
Yeah.
because it's all on camera and it's all in camera. But there you go.
Yeah, no, I love that. So yeah, actually our friend is the one that did it, and we have another project together, but we he's got intros for other people, but this is the first one where we were kind of like, okay, well, women-led horror podcast, feminine rage, kind of, badass women type, and he did some very deep cuts. So shout out to Tiki on that.
You remember the name of that offhand?
No, I do not. I know like he is so good about it though. He goes through and searches archives and really like gets deep into it. So I know we had talked about it initially because I need to watch it because I've seen the movie that it's from before, but it's been a long time, and I really would be interested to see like through the lens now of a woman, having a child and everything, how your views definitely change from there. So
Definitely.
1937 which movie visual effect shot? Is it called The Octopus?
yeah, I think it is. Yep.
I was second guessing myself.
Yep.
All right, sorry, I'm totally derailing this because
no.
One of the coolest images, where it's really great, and it shows up on social media every now and then. It's like, have you seen this before? And it's really fantastic because it's back in the day when people were incredibly resourceful as filmmakers.
Yes.
And,
Yeah. And I think it's just such a great visual representation too of like women in horror, because it is like taking the mask off, and I think that that's such an incredible like homage to it. So definitely understood the assignment when it came to an intro for women-led horror. So which kind of transitions into my first question. So obviously we had talked prior, but the late '90s kind of mark a transitional period in horror cinema where we kind of saw different things coming about. We did kind of see tonal changes, and honestly, social media and the internet started to kind of slowly creep its way in, and we started seeing new things. How did you decide which films and moments from 1995 through 99 were essential to include in the documentary?
Well, first I have to clarify that the documentary is currently ongoing. So when you say how did I decide, I just want to clarify that we're in production. But what ultimately the narrative of these documentaries, which are surveys of an entire decade. So we did 3 for the 80s, Search of Darkness Part 1, 2, and 3. We kept on going back to the well because people said more 80s because there's so much more to tackle. We decided to do things a little differently with the 90s. Like you said, we did 90 to 94, and now we're doing 95 to 99. And so by doing things slightly differently, I get to do more of a deep dive in each half of this decade, which can be really sort of overshadowed by Scream and by meta filmmaking and by sort of this teen-driven sort of phenomenon that happened in the wake of Scream. But, The Craft, which came right before Scream, actually. But a lot of these sort of teen-driven films were extremely important for a variety of reasons, but I would single out one key reason was most people, when they remember the 90s and they think about Scream and then what else came, I don't know, let's think about it, but Scream is just right off the top of the head, is because that was a movie that really cracked into the mainstream, and horror did not do that very often. So as I'm telling a story of a decade, for the first half of the 90s, that was really essentially a story about horror trying to find its footing and its identity in the wake of the 80s, because the 80s was absolutely just a golden era, overflowing with amazing storytelling and effects, and whether it's really great studio fare or going straight to video, there was just so much to chew on. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, if not in the low thousands of movies made. The 90s, there still was a huge avalanche of stuff, but when people think about it, they don't think about it as much. They think about the 80s sort of stealing the spotlight. So this first half being kind of trying to define what it was, I would say by the time we get to 95 and 99, horror definitely found its footing. And if anything, I think it had become slicker. It had finally gauged its audience in terms of understanding what the audience might want and definitely wants, So whether it's a mainstream audience saying, I could do a little bit of horror too, because I see all the stars from Friends and Dawson's Creek are going to be in these horror movies that really aren't blood and guts, but more like thrillers. At least that's how they were able to sort of get ingratiated in that kind of stuff. But the second half of the 90s really were kind of meta fueled. It was all self-referential. Filmmakers like Wes Craven, especially with like New Nightmare, they tapped into the fact that we as horror fans really love a nod and a wink to our knowledge of what we were watching. And there are so many tropes that had been established in the 80s that by the 90s, it was like, well, how do we kind of keep this from becoming cliche? Well, I think if we acknowledge that there's obvious necessary cliche elements to fabricate and structure a horror film, we could still have some fun with it and play with it. And you get movies like Scream, you get movies like Bride of Chucky, which totally reinvigorated the Chucky franchise from something that was more straightforward to now completely poking fun at itself and horror in general.
Yeah,
that's a long answer, wasn't it?
No. I think that is great, because I do think that is part of the thing that like changed, is it did like through Scream, and also too, like I know one of Kylie's favorites is Blair Witch, and Blair Witch kind of whether there are certain movies that definitely established like this holding on horror history that like definitely did shift things.
Yeah, well, Blair Witch is also an interesting, because it's got a bit of a toehold in meta filmmaking as well. I mean, first of all, it's a found footage. They didn't use found footage as a common term back then, but they started using it when Blair Witch became an absolute phenomenon. We could talk all about Blair Witch and why it was spectacular at the time, because nobody saw it coming out of left field, and especially Hollywood that spends a huge amount of money. And this is this tiny little movie that took it Hollywood by storm. But it's got a toehold in meta filmmaking, because it's a movie about people seeking out the Blair Witch, or finding out, what they could find out about it. But they're talking about like horror. They're like, well, is this the we get lost in the woods and the killer's going to get us. And, it's a film about filmmaking that is a found footage film about filmmakers that was never really a lost footage film in the first place. So it sort of folds in upon itself. And it's more clever than some people might remember.
Yeah. No, I definitely think.
Most definitely.
Yeah, most definitely. Kylie, to you.
One of my questions is, which franchise or horror movie do you think was very impactful besides Scream? I think Scream is just talked about so much, but there are a lot of other great movies that were made, especially from 95 to 99.
Now, are you talking about films individually or franchise films?
In general.
Because I wouldn't necessarily point to I Know What You Did Last Summer, but that was pretty much the first one that jumped in, where everyone was had Kevin Williamson fever, and they're like, we want something like Scream. What's this? It's the new Kevin Williamson guy. What? It's guy running around with a fish hook? Fine, we'll take it. It's got Jennifer Love Hewitt and all the people I love. But that era, I think, was defined by a variety of different things, although not, I guess it became a franchise. Arguably, it was like From Dusk Till Dawn, for example. Robert Rodriguez is, he gets together with Quentin Tarantino to pull the rug out from under us, because we think this is, unless you missed all the advertising, which was kind of hard to miss. But if you came in that one cold, you're like, wait, this is a cool Tarantino heist movie with Clooney and Tarantino in it. Wait, what the heck? They're just in a den of vampires now? That's insane. There's so many fun little things, but I would say one of the most influential ones that came out actually had to be Seven, David Fincher's Seven.
Yes.
Which is not traditionally considered a horror film, but gosh, it's the 7 deadly sins of a serial killer and lots of blood and guts. And someone's head might end up, disconnected. So, I don't know. I don't know what to spoil anymore these days, but I try not to. But I want to respect that there are people who come to these things having heard of it but never having seen it. But Seven was incredibly influential just based on style alone. Every film. I just watched. I just did a rewatch of End of Days with Arnold Schwarzenegger, which came out in 1999, which sort of ties into the Y2K millennium angst and the end of the world that a lot of people were experiencing in the late 90s. But that movie is Seven through and through in terms of its darkness and production design and scrawls on walls and cryptic messages and sort of a goose chase trying to get the devil, and figure out what's happening with what's going on. So I would go with Seven.
No, I think that's an incredible answer to me. Yeah, because like for me, I think that is one movie that a lot of people sleep on. I know for me too, like I feel like two big ones, especially when you're talking slasher, and I just wanted to like make sure that they were in that time period, because I know like certain, but Urban Legend and The Faculty were two big ones for me that I feel like a lot of people forget about, that I feel like we're now getting more footing. But Urban Legend in particular, because it does kind of have like a very Scream-esque quality to it, but it takes this kind of idea that Scream brought up, and it takes these like parts and components of like, we've all been at a party and we've heard like, crazy local legend of like, this is what would happen, or, this person ate a Mentos and had cola after and their stomach exploded, or something like that. And it took the idea of that and like capitalized on that. And I think that's something that then we see people even now playing with too. And you know, obviously Sinners just came out and made a huge splash, and it's got a lot of like very From Dusk Till Dawn quality
Yes.
to it as well.
Yeah,
So I think it's a formula that we see start at this time period, but then it also gets expanded much later on.
I get tremendous joy out of reading the occasional tale where someone walked into Sinners not knowing that it's a vampire movie. You know, and you know, maybe they thought it was like an era, like a gangster flick or something like that. And so that's what makes it so great, is that you get totally enveloped in the story to the point where you're like, wait, no, they're all gonna die because of vampires? You're kidding me. You know, so it's really kind of fun to see some people who just got hoodwinked.
Yeah, I love it too, because I mean, we all kind of at this point know, but if somebody hasn't seen From Dusk Till Dawn, I will be very certain to be like, okay, well, I'm not going to tell you specifically what happens to it.
Yeah, sometimes it's like, yes, like when you find that rare oyster of a person, you know, that pearl of a person who basically, you know, they haven't seen something that you know is just wonderful, but it's got some killer twist. You know, I do that with Miracle Mile. It's not a horror movie, but I don't know if you've ever heard of Miracle Mile.
No, I have not.
Late 80s movie. It's got Anthony Edwards from ER in it and Mary Winningham. If you just put that on and just do not watch any trailers, do not read anything about it, just pop it in. It's a love story that goes in a direction you would never expect, and it totally encapsulates that era. It's a digression because we're not talking about horror now, but I just love.
No.
Well, I love, you know, these movies where you're just like, a lot of people like to gatekeep. Oh, you haven't seen this, or you need to see this, or how could you call yourself a horror fan and not having seen this? And don't shame people. There's way too much to choose from. If anything, these documentaries that I make, I think, provide a great opportunity to curate from a certain era, so people can see not only what we've chosen, but see people talk about it and say why they love it and enthuse about it. And even if it's not the greatest movie, you could understand what's going on behind the scenes with the film, and make your choice whether or not, all right, that's interesting, but I'm not really interested in the film. Or you might be even more interested because you find out some tales behind the scenes where you're just like, or people that you admire and respect saying, oh, this is really good, because that's kind of the fun of these In Search of Darkness documentaries that I get to make.
No, I think that's incredible, because I know, like, for me, the 80s, that was why, like, talking to you the first time was so special to me too, because of the 80s, I watched those during COVID. Like I watched through those, and I literally put them on the background. I would listen to them as I'm cleaning, doing different things. And when I had a movie that I hadn't seen before and it sounded spectacular, I would just write a list, and I would just make that my personal challenge to like go through and watch certain movies. And it was really very nice, and just kind of like a comfort, because it was like, oh, I get to go even deeper on these levels. And I do think that we have to remember, like, not everyone has access to horror the way that a lot of us did, you know, growing up. Like, we talk about it all the time, but AMC was like a huge thing for Kylie and I both, because Fear Fest was huge, and that was something that was on cable, and they put certain movies, and we would not know about a lot of movies if it wasn't for like that and sci-fi and different things. And I think that is something that then we do see kind of shift in this particular set of the 90s too, is when, you know, that starts becoming predominant as well, where we start seeing things more televised and movies being put on television and specific channels being dedicated to having those times, because it gave a lot of access to people who I don't think would have had it. Kylie is that rare person, because she had never seen From Dusk Till Dawn before, and I told her,
I didn't. I just watched that recently for the first time a few months ago, and I was like, why have I never seen this?
Did you know it was coming? Did you know the twist?
No, I did
not. Tell me what you thought about that film then, especially when it took that turn. First of all, how was the
Well,
film until that took that turn?
it was just so much fun, and it was something. It just it was something that I don't think you see often more in horror movies now today. Like the creativity, the certain twists and turns of just when you're going into a movie and you're thinking it's going to be a certain way, but it just completely goes left. I feel, while I'm a person who goes into every horror movie like trying not to have any expectations, I just try to have fun with it. Like I'm a true horror fan. I think a lot of horror fans today are very just overly critical, but I will say there are a lot of horror movies being made that are very kind of redundant, and a lot of them are kind of the same. And you just don't see movies like From Dusk Till Dawn, Urban Legends, Seven really anymore. I wish we could really bring that back.
A lot of them use to sort of mine the 80s and the 90s for their ideas and their storytelling. And it is fine. You know, I think there's lots of good stuff now, but you do have to search a little harder for it.
Yeah.
I'd also like to say that I used to be an entertainment journalist and write for Famous Monsters magazine and be the editor of that. It was my job to watch every single trailer and every single teaser to the trailer and write about it and ad nauseum and spoil everything, because that was my job to do that. And it spoiled it for me. And ever since I've been able to evolve from those occupations, and I don't pass judgment, it was just, for me, it kind of ruined it. And so I was able to sort of move away from that. Now, whenever I know that I want to see a movie, I don't even watch the teaser. Like I go, la, 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 la. If I'm in the movie theater, I try and show up late. Now that you can have your own reserved seat, I'm that guy who shows up 5 minutes before the movie starts, because then I just see Nicole Kidman walking in saying, this is a wonderful place. But, like the AMC thing. Anyway.
Yes. I love that.
Yeah, you looked at me blankly. I'm like, I thought everybody
No.
knows.
It's because I know exactly like what you're talking about too. And it's so.
But I just love the watching a movie like you did with From Dusk Till Dawn organically, where I want to see it. I'm here. You got me. I'm sitting as a captive audience. Why do I want to know what's coming? Or why do I want to say, well, I know this is happening because I haven't seen it yet? Or I know the big twist because I saw it in the trailer. Maybe, is that going to be in it or not? I really actively avoid it all. And I enjoy movies a lot more because I have no expectations other than I want to see it.
No, I agree with that.
I remember just kind of as a kid, there was not a lot of access to a lot of horror movies. So there was a lot of times like you were renting from Blockbuster or Family Video or watching stuff on AMC on Fear Fest, which they had like on Fridays and like during Halloween. And you'd go through a lot of kind of corny horror movies, but I just found that so much joy in that. Like, okay, I didn't really like this one, but let's watch this one and see if we really, really do like it. And it was a lot of fun as a kid.
Yeah, your comfort blanket, right? It's kind of, some people, my mom, she still doesn't get it. She's like, I'm so glad you're happy doing what you're doing, but I don't understand your movies. And why do you like horror so much? I think we all as horror fans have had to respond to at least someone and explain that we're not all serial killers ourselves, but this is actually something that vicariously we can sort of escape the realities of the real world that are true horrors in all variety of manners, and just escape and enjoy and live vicariously. And it's a little bit of a way to sort of get your own aggressions out, but not physically, when you watch some of this stuff.
Yeah.
It's cathartic for a lot of people when you see other people buy it and you don't have to, and you're not so scared, or you're like, wow. Are you, from the artistic standpoint of just the visual effects or the special effects or just the storytelling, where you're like, whoa, I haven't seen this before. How did they do this? Because this looks damn real,
Yeah, most definitely. Were there any overlooked or underrated films from this particular 95 to 99 that you felt like deserved more or even as you're currently going through the process, you feel like deserves more spotlight?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. One of the great things about my job is my homework is watching movies, and like I said, I rewatched End of Days. I haven't seen that since I saw it in the theater, and I liked it more this time around. I was highly entertained. Now, I wouldn't call that like a forgotten gem. It's an Arnold Schwarzenegger action, action horror film. But there are films that I remember very specifically going by in the video store where I was like, oh, Ice Cream Man, with Clint Howard. I'm not sure if I want to see that. Or, my mindset was at the time when a lot of this stuff was new at the video store that was straight to video. First of all, my mindset was like, well, I was a bit of a snob. I'm completely the opposite now. But I was a snob back then. Like, well, it wasn't a theatrical release, so I don't know if this is worth my time. Because if the theater, if the studios didn't believe in it, why should I rent this piece of crap?
Right.
But as a horror fan, you start realizing that you discover stuff that you missed, that slipped through the cracks, that really just only came out straight to video, and there's absolute merit in it. Or if it's not the greatest film from a production standpoint, it's very creative storytelling, or there's just like this comfort blanket you discussed. It's just super fun. So I as my homework, I revisit all these titles where I really zero in when I look at year to year from 95 to 99, and I'm like, saw it, didn't get around to seeing it. I never heard of this one. What's this? Wait, and that stars who? And I watch it, or I'm like, people have talked about this, but I've never seen it, So I don't want to name names because I like to keep, the content of these movies a surprise, and I think we reveal enough when it comes to the mainstream stuff, but I'll happily single out this one video. I passed by the box, and it was Rupert Everett standing in a cemetery, and it said Cemetery
Man. Yep.
And I remember completely dismissing that as just like, Cemetery Man, what does he do? Dig ditches? Is it a love story? Is he depressed? This is not the movie for me. Keep going, And but then a couple of years later, this is way before I started doing the In Search of Darkness movies, someone would start saying, "Oh, Italian horror, Della Morte, you got to seek this out." And I remember when I finally sought it out, I'm just like, wait a minute, is this the Cemetery Man that I kept? This is Cemetery Man, isn't it? One and the same. And it's an amazing film. And I think a lot of people, maybe like me, dismissed it. There are plenty of fans out there who know about it. But if you haven't seen this movie, it's practical effects. It's very resourceful. It's incredibly sexy. It's incredibly violent. But the violence is because people, you discover it yourself.
Yeah.
I don't want to dive into it, but it's, when I say violent, it's a little more cartoonish violence, but there's lots of very graphic kills and that kind of stuff like that in as well. But it's a love story through and through, with us as in a supernatural tale, and it's highly recommended.
Yeah, I love that. We just did an episode on one that I think highly gets undercut. And when I watched it for the first time, like I'd heard about it, but when I watched it for the first time, I'm like, why wasn't this huge? This is incredible. But we did an episode on In Dreams.
Oh
with
yeah,
Matt Benning.
And
I was like, why isn't this huge? Like this is such a solid tale about like just so many deep like undercurrent things, and it is something that literally like grabs you from the moment you go in and you're in this journey with this woman. But it definitely is. And the other one for me too is, even though it is respected sort of, but a lot of people forget, like Blade is huge. Like a lot of people try to undersell Blade, but Blade's really the first time that we get to see like horror and like on that level where
Yeah.
we then had a Marvel like superhero anti-hero, but it was also incredibly violent, and it was also these like deep things that, looking back at it, like that's the one film that I specifically like look at and I'm like, that was the late 90s, because
I
that
would say, sorry to interrupt, that the big
No.
thing about the 90s was sometimes the titles were really awful.
yeah
And sometimes the more generic a title got, like Deep Rising. I'm like, do I
Yeah.
really need to see Deep Rising?
Mhm.
Even Mercury Rising,
Yeah.
which was the same year, entirely different movie with Bruce
Lake
Willis.
Placid was
Yeah,
another.
Lake Placid, and you're like, well, is that about the Olympics, Lake Placid? I don't know.
Yeah,
You know?
it's so unassuming, but
Well,
then
I'm glad you brought that two together, because Deep Rising and Lake Placid both have a tremendous amount of humor, and they're very fun. And you're having so much fun watching the characters having fun in these movies where they're all dying, by each the common denominator is a creature is devouring people,
yes,
anaconda,
yes,
Yes.
but these are super duper fun things. But sometimes like Cemetery Man, the title is just it's so anemic. You're like, I'm not interested. But sometimes word of mouth will save it.
yeah, most definitely. Kylie, it's to you.
What commonalities do you see in horror movies from 95 to 99?
An interesting thing that I see, other than all the meta, that you've got a sort of teen-driven movies that came back with an absolute. It became the thing that Hollywood really wanted to make, because that was making the most money, and they, like I said, you can get, Monica from Friends, or, you forget me with the names, but like, half the cast of Dawson's Creek,
Yep.
Yep.
would show up in some of these things. But ultimately it was, if it wasn't meta or teen driven, there were a lot of films where I think the filmmakers were trying to get very creative with twists or a twist ending, So whether it's Robert Rodriguez and Quentin Tarantino with From Dusk Till Dawn, or you've got The Sixth Sense, of course, at the tail end of that. You have a lot of movies where they were starting to play with your expectations to the point where it radically changed things, and you kind of kept you on your toes. You could find that in kind of a common denominator in some of the films as well.
Yeah,
I agree 100%.
Yeah, I think that's
Seven as well. They caught the guy. The movie should be over, but wait, there's one more present to be opened.
Yeah. I think it's also too where we start seeing really like playing with things, because Sleepy Hollow was 1999, and that's when we started seeing like the rise of like mixing horror and The Mummy was the same way. The Mummy is, it's the Mummy that started off Universal Monsters, started off horror.
I'm sorry, you sometimes pinging things.
No, go ahead.
I hate to interrupt, but I think action horror was something that really kind of was a rise as well, because you have, whether it's Deep Rising, whether it's The Mummy, whether it's even End of Days, which is an action movie.
Yes.
From Dusk Till Dawn is arguably an action movie as well. But and Blade, of course, very much so. These are action-driven films. In the 90s were a huge sort of, it was a Die Hard era, so a lot of movies, I think, I see another commonality there.
Yeah, definitely. I do see that as well, because I think a lot of people forget that Blade is the reason that Marvel sticked around long enough to become what ended up becoming Marvel, because it was really that like big of a commercial success that kept it kind of flowing through for years, even when the years were not great on some of the properties, and really kept, everything going. So then we could get to the point where it became what it became for Disney and everything like that.
Yeah.
So you do
Spawn,
see
Spawn was another one
Spawn
too.
was huge.
It's not a Marvel property, but it's a comic book source, and it's sort of it's kind of hand in hand with Blade, and they both came out around the same time.
Yeah. And they featured two incredibly strong people, which was Wesley Snipes and then obviously Jay. I mean, it's incredible. So the last question that I want to ask you as we're wrapping everything up is, obviously, in the decade that we are in now, with the rise of digital media and fan communities, especially with how the horror community has taken on a new realm of fandom, especially since COVID, and with kind of the boom that we've seen with legacy sequels and everything like that, how do you see the role of documentaries such like this shaping the legacy of how we remember horror media, how we remember horror movies?
I think for lack of a better way of describing it, I feel like we're kind of in the letterboxed era, where I think people not only are happy to write about the films that they love, and they get to be their own movie critic and rate it and talk about why they love it or hate it, or make their own lists and be able to share it with people and have influence there. I think a lot of people look to these movies like In Search of Darkness and similar ones, History of Horror, Horror's Greatest. These are all really good because you get these talking heads who are from the era, or experts and fans of the era, talking about why these movies are important and why they were so influential. And so it kind of goes back to this idea of curation. You can create your lists. You can figure out what you want. You can learn about subgenres. You ultimately can get a time capsule snapshot of an era and say, well, sure, the movies from this era were good because it says it came out in 95 to 99. But why? And why were they important? And how did they fit in that latter half of the decade? What trends were they part of? And how were they reflecting real life things that were going on, like the OJ trial, or the LA riots and the Rodney King beating, or, real-time war, the Gulf War, or even, whatever is happening during the 90s or any decade. Horror is often reflecting that. So I think when people look at a lot of these documentaries, mine included, I think, that they really are instructive to give you an idea of the type of converging ideas that were coming together when you look at a movie trends over the course of a decade or half decade. But I think also, people ultimately come back to these, literally for ideas. People come back to the In Search of Darkness movies when it's almost Halloween. October's coming. And people are like, I know what I want to watch. I have my list, but I have 15 days that are unaccounted for where I want to discover something new, but I need some ideas. Or gosh, I want to do a whole different thing, but I'm only going to do a decade this time, or I'm going to do only one particular filmmaker or subgenre. Where can I go to get some ideas? And they put this on, or put it on in the background for a party. I don't know.
No, and I feel
it's a clip fest.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I feel like the reason why it is so important is, and I'm just going to touch upon this one person because of the fact that I think a lot of us are feeling his passing a little bit more, especially with the time frame given now and how influential he was to the 90s period. But, like for people like Tony Todd, who it was a big touching point for a lot of us in horror, whether he was Candyman, he was in Final Destination as, the character he played, or he was in the remake of Night of the Living Dead, or, he played so many, The Crow, and he played so many different things. I think it's important because it's continuing on, because as we see with Final Destination coming out this past weekend, and that was his last final role, it was very evident and clear to him that he wanted to make sure his legacy was remembered in a certain way. So for people who don't have that opportunity where they have the time to think about that, it just happens so I think things like this are so important because you do have to remember the people that gave so deeply, because there are so many deep horror performances that really pull a lot of out of somebody. And I think he's a prime example, because you can't think of Candyman without him. You can't think of death not being foreshadowed without him. And, so many different, things that in contributions he gave us. But I do think it's important, because as fans, we want them to be remembered for such a long period of time to come. And I think that's what helps give us a longevity to it. So I really appreciate that. So bonus question, we're wrapping up. What was the last great 90s movie that you watched?
Well, the most recent is End of Days, but I feel like I'm selling that one today, but I literally watched it last night, so it's very fresh on my mind. And I was when I first saw that in the theater. I'll give you another title as well. But when I first saw End of Days in the theater, I saw it when it came out in '99, and I was like, another Arnold Schwarzenegger movie. Is he kind of, he's trying to do horror? It's going to be oil and water, but I want to see it because it'll be fun. And I remember I felt like it was trying a little hard. The director, I love the director, Peter Hyams. But I felt like just collectively, it's trying it's trying to be like Seven. It's trying to be like The Omen. It's trying to be also an action movie with explosions and lots of gunfire and Arnold being an action hero. I'm not sure if I'm buying this. And watching it last night, I laughed out loud. I was highly entertained. I saw it for what it is, which is all the things I described. But back then it took itself seriously. Now I feel like it's a snapshot of an era and of an action star trying to remain relevant, but trying to find new material. So wading into horror to try and find something with an action horror hybrid. And I saw it in an entirely new light, and I laughed and was entertained, and I smiled. But what have I seen recently that I recently rewatched The First Power with Lou Diamond Phillips, which is an early 90s movie. That popped up, and I saw that when that was in the theater as well, and I hadn't seen it since. And I was like, you know what? I want to give this another shake. This is kind of fun. I don't know if you've ever heard of The First Power.
No, I have not.
I think you can find it on, I think the Magic Tubi has it, I believe.
Yep.
But it's just Lou Diamond Phillips plays an LA cop, and there's a serial killer. But I tied this into End of Days because it's semi-similar, although entirely different. It may or may not be the devil, but this guy, and I'm not spoiling too much because this happens like in the first 15 minutes. This guy goes to the electric chair, but he won't die, and he keeps on coming back in different forms. And of course, Lou Diamond Phillips has to figure out what's going on. There's lots of running, lots of chasing, lots of fun practical effects. It's an action film. It's clearly kind of a lower budget thing, but I think it's a fun time capsule movie as well.
I think that's
one on my list.
Kylie, what about you? What's the last 90s movie that like one that stands out to you?
One that was one of, well, there's a couple, but one that was like one of my all-time favorites of watching on TV, I don't think it's talked about enough, is Disturbing Behavior with Nick Stahl, James Marsden, and Kate Holmes. I hadn't watched it in a really long time until yesterday, and I was so excited. I forgot how much I loved that freaking movie.
Yeah,
it's so good. It's one of my
really
favorites.
Is.
I think that the Disturbing Behavior, that of course came with this whole swell of Scream-like movies. Mm-hmm. It really is nothing like Scream, but since it came at the same time, they tried to sell it like an urban legend, or I Know What You Did Last Summer, or Disturbing Behavior. Now it's got horror elements to it, but I think what's interesting is that I think it kind of got lost in the shuffle I did well at the time, but I think in terms of people's perceptions versus what it was, you have to not blame the film, but you have to blame the marketing a little bit. And I think another one that kind of slips through the cracks that I highly recommend is The Rage, Carrie 2.
Yes.
I was just watching that.
That's a great female-driven movie. It's about sexual politics. It's inspired by the real-life Spur posse that was doing bad things. Read about it, bad behavior by the football team, essentially, or I don't know if it was literally the football team, but it is in the movie. And it also happens to be the sequel to Carrie, so you got Amy Irving in it as well. But if you look at that, it's kind of one of those movies where, sure, the telekinetic, insanity with Emily Burgle, as the lead is really, really good. But you can kind of watch that movie as like a teen high school movie about relationships, about bullying, about depression, about sexual politics. And it stands on its own in terms of how people navigate that kind of stuff. But what's tasty about it is the ultimate comeuppance to the bullies and the people who set her up. And that's why it's fun. But I think that movie really was sort of drowned in the fact that people were like, do we need a Carrie sequel where, of course, Carrie's dead, Stephen King's not involved, and this girl doesn't even look like Carrie, and she's got this vine tattoo that's supposed to be super cool. So I don't know if I buy that, Of course, that's me projecting. But I saw it later, and I just said, this is a great, great movie that more people need to know about.
Yeah, I agree with that. So to kind of piggyback off that, my two ones, especially in preparation of this, was Cherry Falls with Brittany Murphy, where I think that does kind of throw like the trope on its head, where they're going after virgins instead of the opposite. And it's definitely one that I think people don't think about often. And one movie I feel like particularly that doesn't get a ton of credit because it is a remake, but it's very slick for its style. And we see that then shadowed on going forward with like 13 Ghosts and Ghost Ship is House on Haunted Hill. And how just kind of, even though it is a movie that is a remake, it has its own tonal style. And I think it's the first movie that I really watched growing up where I was like, what the hell is this? Like, what do you mean this guy is like, because I had only known Famke Jensen. I think that's how you Famke. I had only seen her in X-Men. So I'm like, why is the woman from X-Men, her husband is trying to kill? Okay, I guess so. And then you get into some of the kills and like some of the scenes and stuff like that.
And the house about what's real and what's not.
Yep. And like the house locking itself down and just like all of it. It was just very like, I was like, oh, so this is what horror is about. Okay, I get it now. But it was very much like one of those like light bulb moments where it's like, okay, well, this is different than what I'm used to seeing. So then this is foraying me into like going into deeper levels of things versus what I had seen before. So I think that they're great. So most of the movies we had talked about, they are readily available currently now. So we will try to find where a lot of these are and link them in the description down below. I would highly recommend, especially with the 90s in particular, going on Tubi, where a lot of those do sit around and has kind of become like our virtual Blockbuster. So we highly encourage you to have a late 90s movie night, watch some films you normally wouldn't have watched. And definitely what you need to go do is go pre-order In Search of Darkness 1995 to 1999. It is open until June 9th.
Correct.
And David is still piecing everything together. And
go to 90shorrordoc.com, 90s horrordoc.com until June 9th at midnight. and you can pre-order it. You can get your name in the credits.
Yep.
All sorts of amazing, cool perks and swag. And we really do everything we can to make it a physical media collector's dream. Amazing new artwork. I don't know if you guys have seen the posters.
I have.
Posters. Dave Morrell did. He's done posters ever since part 2. Very colorful. Very an Easter egg extravaganza. In a high school hallway is super duper cool. The other one is the kid and the TV, but it's all brand new. It's got a little bit of a Blair Witch feel and all, Ghostface and all your favorites. That's by Clayton Benj, who's our creative director. We do everything we can to make it a fun experience where it's more than just you pre-order and you wait for the movie to arrive. We like to involve you and we like to get your input, and we want you to feel like you are helping get this over the line and help preserve horror history as well. If you love the 90s like you guys do and I do, as time goes by, we're going to be farther and farther. We're already 30 years away from it. We're already 3 decades away. I'm sorry to say. I'm sorry. I have to tell that to myself. It's like a pinch me reality. Is that really true? But, well, the gray hair is giving it away. But, it's one of those things where time is going to go by, and the further away it is, the more people need help, trying to decide why. First of all, what are the great movies? What are the ones that slip through the cracks? What were the ones that straight to video? The really well-known ones, but also the really eclectic ones. But why were all the movies kind of like this during this time? Oh, I see a trend here. I see what people were trying to do. I see filmmakers inspired by other filmmakers and studios inspired by other studios and the money that they were making. All these things are part of the story.
Yeah, no, I think that that's incredible. And as always, please go and show this documentary some love, because it is truly just a gift that we get to continually go in and get these slices of horror history. And I promise you, as somebody who has loved and adored every iteration of the In Search of Darkness series, they are so incredible and so just well put together. So
Thank you.
of course. So please go show them some love. Click the links down in the description down below. And thank you so much, David, for coming on once again. We really appreciated it. So until next time, it's me, Cass, and
Kylee.
And we are saying bye and stay spooky. Bye.